On a golden evening in Savannah, Georgia, the gardens of the historic Riverwood estate are lit with hanging lights, wildflowers, and quiet promises of a new beginning. Among the guests walks Camille Hart, 26 years old, American, with curly dark hair and light eyes, calm, composed, and walking toward the altar. This isn't just her wedding day, it's the day she finally leaves the past behind. But not everyone is celebrating. During dinner, her father, Alan Hart, a man with sharp words and concern disguised as control, raises his glass for a toast. In front of everyone, he delivers a line dipped in sarcasm, like poison in honey. Let's see how long this lasts. She'll ruin his life, like she ruined everything else. Stifled laughs from a few relatives, embarrassed silence from others. Camille rises, steady, serene, shaped by years of therapy, distance, and rebuilding. She walks over to her father, pulls an envelope from her bouquet, and hands it to him in front of the entire room. "You don't live at my house anymore, Dad. Starting today." Inside, a formal eviction letter terminating his right to live in the home Camille inherited from her mother, the only woman who ever tried to protect her. Because this isn't just a wedding. It's the end of a cycle of manipulation, the rise of a woman who learned to stand on her own, who stopped asking for love and started demanding respect, who finally realized she doesn't have to carry guilt that was never hers. Watch Camille's moment of quiet power and the day she chose her future over her past. Subscribe for more stories about breaking cycles, finding strength, and healing with purpose. Chapter 1. The Garden of New Beginnings. The Riverwood Gardens shimmered under the golden light of a Savannah sunset. Spanish moss hung from ancient oaks like silver curtains, swaying gently in the warm Georgia breeze. White wooden chairs adorned with wildflower bouquets lined the aisle that cut through manicured lawns. String lights twinkled overhead, waiting for dusk to fully showcase their gentle glow. Camille Hart stood before the antique vanity mirror in the estate's bridal suite, her reflection a testament to years of rebuilding herself from scratch. At 26, her face held the quiet determination of someone who had survived storms without drowning. Her dark curls were partially swept up, with tendrils framing her face. The wedding dress, simple, elegant, with delicate lace that reminded her of her mother's favorite tablecloth, hugged her frame perfectly. "You look beautiful, Cam," said Lauren, her maid of honor and oldest friend, approaching with a small velvet box. "Your mom would have cried happy tears today." Camille's light eyes misted slightly at the mention of Elizabeth Hart. 7 years gone, but the absence still felt fresh on days like this. "I have something for you," Lauren continued, opening the box to reveal a pair of pearl earrings. "These were your mom's. Your Aunt Sarah grabbed a few things before your dad could get to them." Camille's fingers trembled as she touched the pearls. "He didn't sell them?" she whispered, surprised. "Sarah grabbed a few things before your dad could get to them," Lauren explained softly. "You know how he was after she passed." Yes, Camille knew. Alan Hart had moved quickly through grief into bitterness, selling Elizabeth's cherished possessions to declutter, drinking away the insurance money, and eventually moving into the small Charleston house that Elizabeth had inherited from her grandmother. The house that, by the terms of Elizabeth's secretly updated will, had passed directly to Camille when she turned 25. The house where Alan still lived, rent-free because Camille had been too afraid to confront him. Until today. A knock on the door interrupted her thoughts. Sarah, her mother's younger sister, peeked in. "It's almost time, sweetheart," she said, her smile warm but her eyes betraying concern. "Everyone's seated. Your father is, well, he's here. 3rd glass of whiskey already." Camille nodded, slipping the pearl earrings on. "Did you give the envelope to Rachel?" Sarah nodded. "Your wedding planner has it. Are you sure about this, Camille? Today of all days?" Camille turned from the mirror, her expression resolute. "I'm starting a new life today, Aunt Sarah. I can't do that with one foot still trapped in the past." She reached for her bouquet, wildflowers wrapped in lace, with a hidden pocket that would soon hold an envelope. Let's not keep everyone waiting. Outside, 90 guests sat in anticipation as the string quartet began to play. Among them, in the front row, sat Alan Hart. Handsome despite his 58 years, his silver-streaked dark hair combed back, his expression a practiced mask of fatherly pride that didn't reach his eyes. In the row behind him sat Marcus and Teresa Campbell, parents of the groom, watching Alan with barely concealed distaste. They'd witnessed enough of his behavior during the engagement to form their opinions. "He's been drinking since he arrived," Teresa whispered to her husband. "Jacob knows the signal if things get out of hand," Marcus replied quietly. Referring to their son who stood at the altar, handsome in his tailored suit, eyes fixed on the garden entrance where his bride would soon appear. The music shifted, and all heads turned. Camille appeared at the garden's entrance, a vision in white against the backdrop of blooming azaleas. Her steps were measured, deliberate. As she passed each row, guests noticed something different about the bride. Not nervousness, not the typical emotional overwhelm, but a serene determination. When she reached the altar and took Jacob's hands, he whispered, "You okay?" She squeezed his hands and nodded. "I'm exactly where I need to be." The ceremony proceeded beautifully. Vows were exchanged, promises made. When the officiant pronounced them husband and wife, Jacob kissed Camille with such tenderness that several guests dabbed at their eyes. At the reception, tables were arranged under a canopy of lights and the night sky. Dinner was served, wine poured. The atmosphere was joyful, celebratory, exactly what Camille had dreamed of. Then came time for the toasts. Jacob's father spoke first, warm words about love and partnership. Jacob's best friend followed with charming anecdotes that had everyone laughing. Then Alan Hart rose, crystal whiskey tumbler in hand. The room quieted. "Well," he began, his voice carrying the practiced charm that had always masked his cruelty, "I never thought I'd see the day my Camille would settle down." He chuckled, and a few guests laughed uncertainly. "She was always so difficult, headstrong, emotional." Camille felt Jacob tense beside her, but placed a calming hand on his arm. This was her battle. "To Jacob," Alan continued, raising his glass higher, "you're a brave man. Let's see how long this lasts." His voice dropped, but in the sudden silence, everyone heard him clearly. "She'll ruin his life, like she ruined everything else." A collective intake of breath. Stifled laughs from a few of Alan's friends, embarrassed silence from others. Jacob started to stand, but Camille was already rising, steady, calm, the moment crystallizing around her. 7 years of therapy, 3 years of distance, 1 year of careful planning. She walked over to her father, reached into her bouquet, and pulled out an envelope. "You don't live at my house anymore, Dad," she said, her voice clear in the stunned silence. "Starting today." She placed the envelope in his hand and turned away, returning to her seat beside Jacob, who looked at her with a mixture of surprise and admiration. Alan, confused, opened the envelope. His face paled as he read the formal eviction notice, legally prepared, properly served, giving him 30 days to vacate the Charleston property that had belonged to Elizabeth's family for generations, the property that had never been his, though he'd acted like it was. The silence stretched until Sarah stood, raising her glass. "To Camille and Jacob," she said firmly, "may your life together be filled with the love, respect, and honesty that form the foundation of any lasting partnership." The guests, relieved for the tension break, echoed, "To Camille and Jacob." As the band began to play and couples moved to the dance floor, Camille leaned against Jacob's shoulder, watching her father storm out, envelope crushed in his fist. "Are you okay?" Jacob asked, his arm protective around her shoulders. Camille looked up at the twinkling lights, at the faces of those who truly loved her, at the future spreading before her like an open road. "I've never been better," she replied, and for the first time in years, she meant it completely. If this story of finding strength and setting boundaries resonates with you, make sure to subscribe to our channel. In Chapter 2, we'll explore the aftermath of Camille's bold stand and the secrets that have shaped her relationship with her father. Join our community of strong women who are rewriting their own stories, one brave decision at a time. Chapter 2: The Weight of Inheritance. The morning after the wedding dawned bright and clear over Savannah. Camille woke in the honeymoon suite of the Riverwood estate, momentarily disoriented by the unfamiliar play of sunlight across polished hardwood floors. Then she felt Jacob's arm around her waist, his steady breathing against her neck, and remembered. She was Camille Campbell now. Yesterday had not been a dream. She carefully slipped from beneath Jacob's arm and padded to the balcony. The estate gardens were still beautiful in the morning light, though now stripped of their wedding finery. A few workers moved about, collecting the last of the decorations. Camille wrapped herself in a hotel robe and leaned against the railing, letting the memories of the previous day settle like dust after a storm. Her phone buzzed on the nightstand. She hesitated before checking it. 17 missed calls from her father. 5 voicemails and numerous text messages that ranged from guilt-inducing to threatening. She deleted them all without reading or listening, then blocked his number. Another step in reclaiming her peace. There was also a message from Aunt Sarah. "He's on his way to Charleston. Called me furious. You did the right thing, sweetheart. Call me when you can." Camille felt a strange lightness, despite the circumstances. For years, her father had occupied an outsized space in her mind, his moods dictating her emotions, his approval determining her worth. But that power was gone now, exercised by that simple act of handing him the eviction notice. Jacob stirred, sitting up in bed. "Morning, Mrs. Campbell," he said, his voice still husky with sleep. "You okay over there? You look deep in thought." Camille smiled and returned to the bed, sitting on its edge. "Just thinking about yesterday, about what comes next." Jacob took her hand, his thumb brushing over her new wedding band. "Regrets?" "Not a single one," she said firmly, "but I think we need to change our plans a bit. I should go to Charleston, deal with the house situation before we leave for our honeymoon." Jacob nodded, fully understanding the complexity of the situation. He'd been beside Camille through the years of her rebuilding, had witnessed the careful way she'd extracted herself from her father's influence. Therapy session by therapy session, boundary by hard-won boundary. "Whatever you need," he said, "we can delay Bali for a few days." Later that morning, over room service breakfast on their private balcony, they were interrupted by a knock at the door. Jacob answered, to find Lauren standing there, still in last night's dress, her expression tense. "He came back," she said, without preamble. "Your dad, he's downstairs in the lobby, demanding to see you. The staff called me because I was still on property, helping with cleanup." Camille set down her coffee cup with a steady hand. "What does he want?"
"To talk," he says. "He's sober, at least." Lauren hesitated. "He says he has something important to tell you about your mother, about the house." Jacob looked to Camille. "You don't have to see him." Camille was quiet for a long moment. "Yes, I do," she finally said, "but not alone." 15 minutes later, Camille descended to the hotel lobby with Jacob and Lauren flanking her. She'd changed into a simple sundress, her hair pulled back, armor of a different kind than yesterday's wedding gown. Alan Hart sat in a leather armchair, looking diminished somehow. His usual commanding presence was muted, his shoulders slumped beneath his rumpled dress shirt from the day before. When he saw Camille, he stood, then seemed unsure what to do next. "You've got 10 minutes, Camille said, gesturing to a small sitting area away from the main lobby. "Say what you came to say." Alan glanced at Jacob and Lauren. "Privately." "That's not happening," Jacob said, his tone brooking no argument. Alan sighed, but followed them to the sitting area. When they were seated, he pulled a folded document from his pocket. I wasn't just living in that house because I had nowhere else to go. I was protecting it. For you. Camille's expression remained neutral. Protecting it from what? From being sold. He unfolded a document, a letter from a development company dated 6 years ago. After your mother died, this company started circling. They want to demolish the historic homes on that block, build luxury condos. They've been buying out everyone, one by one. And this concerns me how? Camille asked, though a flicker of interest crossed her face. The house is mine. No one can sell it but me. Alan ran a hand through his disheveled hair. It's more complicated than that. The house, it's not just a house. There's something your mother never told you. He hesitated. The property has historical significance beyond your great-grandmother. It was part of the Underground Railroad. There's a hidden room, documentation. If it's demolished, that history is lost forever. Camille stared at him, processing this information. Mom never mentioned this. He was waiting until you were older. Then she got sick so quickly. His voice trailed off. I've been declining their offers for years. That's why I've been living there. The development company can't approach you directly as long as the house is occupied. Why didn't you just tell me this? Camille asked, frustration edging her voice. Instead of letting me believe you were just squatting in my inheritance. Alan looked down at his hands. Would you have believed me? After everything? He shook his head. I handled it badly. I've handled everything badly since your mother died. The drinking, the selling of her things. I was drowning, Camille.
That doesn't excuse how you treated me, Camille said firmly. The cruel comments, the manipulation, the constant criticism. No, Alan agreed quietly. It doesn't. I failed you as a father. He looked up, and for the first time in years, Camille saw something like genuine remorse in his eyes. I was so busy being angry at the world for taking Elizabeth that I didn't see what I was doing to her daughter, the most precious part of her that remained. The silence that followed was heavy with years of unspoken pain. Show me, Camille finally said. Show you what? This hidden room, the documentation. I want to see it for myself. Alan nodded. It's in the basement, behind the old bookcase. Camille exchanged glances with Jacob. We'll drive to Charleston today. You'll show us everything, then we'll decide what happens next. And the eviction? Alan asked cautiously. Still stands, Camille said without hesitation. Whatever happens with the house, our relationship needs boundaries, real ones. 4 hours later, they pulled up to the Charleston house, a modest 2-story colonial with faded blue shutters and a wraparound porch. Camille felt a pang of nostalgia mixed with sadness. She'd spent summers here as a child when her great-grandmother was still alive. Then, after her mother's death, she'd avoided it entirely, unable to face the memories. Alan unlocked the front door, leading them through the familiar yet changed interior. Camille noted her mother's missing antiques, the spaces where family photos once hung, now replaced with generic art. The house felt hollow somehow, stripped of its soul. In the kitchen, Alan moved a worn rug aside to reveal a trapdoor, the basement entrance, he explained, pulling it open to reveal a narrow staircase. Watch your step. The basement was cool and surprisingly dry for a historic Charleston home. Bookshelves lined one wall, filled with old volumes. Alan approached the center bookcase and pulled a specific book, Uncle Tom's Cabin, Camille noted, revealing a small lever behind it. With a click, the entire bookcase swung outward, revealing a small room beyond. My God, Jacob whispered as they stepped inside. The hidden room was small, but meticulously preserved. One wall held a handmade quilt with distinctive patterns that Camille recognized from her history books as navigation codes for the Underground Railroad. A small table held a leather-bound journal and what appeared to be hand-drawn maps. In the corner stood a simple cot. Your great-great-grandparents were abolitionists, Alan explained, his voice hushed with respect. This room harbored escaped slaves on their journey north. Your great-grandmother preserved everything exactly as it was, and your mother continued that tradition. Camille moved to the table, carefully opening the journal. Inside, in faded ink, were accounts of those who had passed through. First names only, dates, brief notes about their journeys, history, preserved and handwritten script. Mom used to bring me down here when I was very little, Camille said softly, a forgotten memory surfacing. She'd tell me stories about brave people helping others to freedom. I thought they were just bedtime stories. She wanted you to understand your heritage, Alan said, the responsibility that comes with it. Camille closed the journal gently. Why didn't you tell me this right away, yesterday, at the wedding? Alan looked ashamed. Pride. Anger. I was hurt that you'd evict me, and I wanted to hurt you back. He shook his head. I'm not proud of who I've become, Camille. She studied her father, truly studied him for perhaps the first time in years. The man before her wasn't the towering figure of her childhood, the sharp-tongued critic of her adolescence, or even the bitter antagonist of her early adulthood. He was just a man, flawed and broken by grief, who had made terrible choices and was now facing their consequences. The development company, Jacob interjected. They don't know about this room. Alan shook his head. No one does outside the family. If they buy the house and demolish it, then this history disappears, Camille finished. She was quiet for a long moment, thinking. I need some time to decide what to do about the house. She turned to her father. But my decision about us stands. You have 30 days to find another place to live. Camille! No, Dad, she interrupted firmly. The house and our relationship are separate issues. You've betrayed my trust too many times. I'm grateful you protected this history, but that doesn't erase years of emotional abuse. Alan looked like he wanted to argue, but instead nodded slowly. I understand. As they climbed back up the basement stairs, Camille felt the weight of her inheritance, not just the physical house with its hidden history, but the emotional legacy of her family, the strength of her great-great-grandparents who risked everything to help others, the quiet determination of her mother who preserved their story, and even perhaps something worth salvaging from her father, if only the lesson of what happens when grief turns to bitterness. Outside, as they prepared to leave, Alan hesitated by the car. For what it's worth, he said quietly, I am proud of you, Camille, for standing up to me. Elizabeth would be proud too. Camille didn't respond immediately. The words she'd longed to hear for years now felt complicated, tangled with everything else. Find a good therapist, Dad. I did. It helps. As they drove away, Jacob reached over to squeeze her hand. You okay? Camille looked back at the house, her house, with its hidden room and complicated history. Like her, it contained multitudes, beauty and pain, secrets and truth, past and future. I will be, she said, and for the first time in a long time, she believed it. Chapter 3. The Rooms We Build. 3 weeks after the wedding, Camille stood on the porch of the Charleston house, watching the moving truck pull away. Inside, the house echoed with emptiness. Alan had finally removed the last of his belongings that morning. He'd left quietly, handing over his key with a nod and a simple, I'll call you when I'm settled. Progress, of a sort. Not forgiveness, not yet, but the beginning of something like mutual respect. Jacob came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist. You're sure about this? He asked, resting his chin on her shoulder. Camille leaned back against him. I'm sure. Their honeymoon to Bali had been postponed indefinitely. Instead, they'd spent the past weeks meeting with historians,
preservation specialists, and lawyers. The result? The house would be designated as a historical landmark, protected from development. The hidden room would become part of a small, carefully managed educational exhibit about the Underground Railroad in Charleston. And the upstairs would be renovated into a shelter for women and children escaping domestic violence, a place of transition and healing, much like the hidden room had been for those seeking freedom centuries ago. "It feels right," Camille said, turning in Jacob's arms to face him. "Mom would have loved this, using our family legacy to help others find their way forward." Jacob smiled, tucking a curl behind her ear. "Your mom would be incredibly proud of you. I know I am." Inside, the house was already changing. Volunteers from the Women's Shelter Organization had been painting the upstairs bedrooms in soothing colors. The downstairs would remain largely historical, with the living room converted into a welcome area and the dining room into a communal space. Camille walked through each room slowly, saying goodbye to one vision of her future and embracing another. She and Jacob had decided to keep their apartment in Atlanta, where they both worked. He as an architect, she as a social worker, but they would visit Charleston regularly to oversee the shelter and preservation efforts. In the kitchen, Sarah was unpacking boxes of dishes donated for the shelter. "These are coming along nicely," she said, gesturing to the organized cabinets. "We should be ready for the first residents within a month." "Have you heard from Dad?" Camille asked, helping to unwrap a stack of plates. Sarah nodded. "He's renting an apartment across town. Started attending those grief counseling sessions I told him about." She paused. "He's trying, Camille, in his own way." "I know," Camille said softly. "I'm not ready to have him back in my life fully, but baby steps."
The doorbell rang, interrupting their conversation. Jacob answered it, returning moments later with Lauren and a woman Camille didn't recognize. "Camille, this is Diane Palmer," Lauren introduced. "She's the journalist I told you about from the Charleston Chronicle. She's interested in doing a feature on the shelter and the history of the house." Diane stepped forward, offering her hand. She was in her 50s, with silver-streaked dark hair and keen eyes behind stylish glasses. "Mrs. Campbell, it's an honor. When Lauren told me about what you're doing here and the remarkable history you've uncovered, I knew this was a story that needed to be shared." Camille shook her hand. "Please, call me Camille. And the history isn't something I uncovered. It was preserved by the women in my family for generations. I'm just continuing their work." "That's exactly the angle I'm interested in," Diane said enthusiastically. "The legacy of women protecting women across time, from your ancestors sheltering those escaping slavery to you creating this safe haven for those escaping abuse. It's a powerful continuity." They settled in the living room, where painter's tarps still covered the floors, but the walls were freshly painted in a warm cream color. As Diane prepared her recorder, Camille found herself reflecting on the journey that had brought her here. "Let's start at the beginning," Diane suggested. "What inspired you to transform your family home this way?" Camille thought carefully before answering. "I inherited two things from my mother: this house and the understanding that healing often requires a safe place to begin again." She gestured around them. "For generations, this house has been that place. First for those escaping slavery, now for women and children needing shelter from violence and control." "And I understand there was a personal element to this decision as well?" Diane prompted gently. Camille nodded, meeting Jacob's supportive gaze across the room. "My relationship with my father was complicated. After my mother died, he became controlling, emotionally abusive. I spent years trying to please him, to earn his approval, before I finally understood that I needed to set boundaries." "Which you did rather dramatically, I hear," Diane said, with a small smile. "At your wedding?" "Not my proudest moment," Camille admitted with a rueful laugh, "but necessary. Sometimes the most important boundaries are the ones that seem most difficult to establish." She paused. "What I've learned is that real love, whether in families or partnerships, requires respect. Without that, it's just control wearing love's clothing. Diane nodded, making notes. And how does your father feel about the house's new purpose? He's adjusting, Camille said diplomatically.
As if summoned by mention of his name, Camille's phone buzzed with a text from Alan. The therapist suggested I write you a letter. I'd like to read it to you someday, when you're ready. Camille showed the message to Jacob, who squeezed her hand in silent support. She texted back a simple, "One day, not yet, but someday." Progress indeed. The interview continued as afternoon light slanted through the windows, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. Camille spoke about the historical preservation efforts, the partnerships with local organizations, the plans for the shelter's programs, but mostly she spoke about transformation, of spaces, of relationships, of self. "What would you say to other women who find themselves in controlling relationships?" Diane asked as the interview wound down. "Women who might be reading this story." Camille considered the question carefully. "I'd say that boundaries aren't selfish, they're necessary. That you deserve respect, not just love. And that sometimes the strongest thing you can do is walk away from people who refuse to see your worth." She smiled slightly. "Oh, and get a good therapist. That helps too." After Diane left, promising to send a draft of the article before publication, Camille found herself drawn to the basement. She descended the stairs alone, pulled the lever behind Uncle Tom's cabin, and entered the hidden room that had started her on this new path. In the quiet of the small space, she could almost feel the presence of those who had sought refuge here, their fear, their courage, their hope for a better future. She thought of her mother, who had wanted to share this legacy with her, of her great-grandmother, who had preserved it faithfully, of all the women in her family line who had, in their own ways, created spaces of safety and possibility. She thought, too, of the women who would soon find temporary harbor in the rooms upstairs, bringing with them their own histories of pain and resilience, their own hopes for transformation. Jacob found her there some time later, sitting quietly beside the small table with its leather-bound journal. "There you are," he said softly, careful not to break the reverent atmosphere. "The painters are finished upstairs. Want to see?" Camille nodded, rising to join him. At the doorway of the hidden room, she paused to look back once more. "Thank you," she whispered, to whom she wasn't entirely sure. To the room itself, perhaps. To her ancestors. To her mother. To whatever confluence of circumstances had led her here to this moment of purpose and peace, upstairs, the house was coming alive with new energy. Volunteers moved through the freshly painted rooms, arranging donated furniture, hanging curtains, making beds with crisp linens. What had once been Camille's childhood bedroom was now a cheerful space with 2 twin beds, destined for a mother and child seeking safety. On the front porch, Sarah was directing the installation of a discreet bronze plaque that read, "The Elizabeth Hart Women's Shelter, a safe harbor for new beginnings." Camille's throat tightened at the sight. "It's perfect," she managed. "There's one more thing," Jacob said, leading her to what had once been her mother's sewing room at the back of the house. "The staff room is finished too." He opened the door to reveal a thoughtfully arranged office space with 3 desks, a small conference table, and walls lined with resources and inspirational quotes. But what caught Camille's eye was the framed photograph hanging in the center wall. Her mother, young and vibrant, standing on this very porch with her arms spread wide in welcome. "Lauren found it in one of your old albums. We thought she should be here, watching over everything." Tears welled in Camille's eyes as she stepped forward to touch the frame gently. "She is here," she said softly. "She always has been." That evening, as sunset painted the Charleston sky in shades of pink and gold, Camille and Jacob sat on the porch swing, watching volunteers leave with promises to return the next day. The shelter's first residents would arrive in 3 weeks, enough time to finish the remaining work and train the staff. "What are you thinking?" Jacob asked, his arm around her shoulders. Camille leaned against him, contemplating the question. I'm thinking about rooms, the ones we build to keep others out, the ones we create to welcome people in, the hidden ones where we store our pain or our power. She gestured toward the house behind them. This place has been all of those at different times. And now it's a doorway, she said with certainty. For me, for the women who'll stay here, a passage from what was to what could be. As darkness fell, they remained on the porch, planning their future together. Not the one they'd imagined on their wedding day, but something richer, more purposeful. They would divide their time between Atlanta and Charleston. They would build their careers, perhaps start a family someday. They would nurture this shelter and the women it would serve. And Camille would continue the work of healing her relationship with her father, not for his sake, but for her own, because she had learned that forgiveness wasn't about erasing the past, it was about creating space for a different future. In the distance, church bells rang out the hour, another day ending, another beginning just around the corner. Camille closed her eyes and breathed in the warm Charleston air, scented with jasmine and possibility. We should go in, Jacob said eventually. Early start tomorrow. Camille nodded, but didn't move immediately. Just a few more minutes, she said, wanting to savor this moment of perfect balance between past and future, ending and beginning, the woman she had been and the one she was becoming.
In the morning, there would be more work to do, more rooms to prepare, more stories to write. But for now, this porch, this moment, this peace was enough. If you've been moved by Camille's journey from setting boundaries to creating a legacy of healing and hope, please subscribe to our channel. Your support allows us to continue sharing stories that inspire and empower women to transform their pain into purpose, their challenges into change. Join our community of resilient women who understand that sometimes the strongest foundations are built on the sites of our greatest struggles. Remember, you are not alone, and your story matters. Subscribe now to be part of this ongoing conversation about strength, healing, and the power of women supporting women.